June 2nd. So I want to welcome folks who are here in person. Before we get started, actually, I'm just going to wait because we have two more members walking in. I'm going to give them a minute. I am recording. Thank you. That's okay. And Jennifer, I hope Jennifer.
And it tells me to leave early because on construction.
Yeah. Oh, my hearing is like this.
So welcome to Hartford. For those of you that are here, I did want to thank our hosts and Katie for setting up for us. We have snacks in the back and there's plenty. So those of you that are here, please partake. But we do really appreciate it. We know it is a lot to host this during the school day. This is a really busy time of year. So we appreciate it. I don't know if you want to say a few words or.
Sure. I want to officially and formally welcome you all into this space here in the Hartford Area Career and Technical Center. We are thrilled to have you all. I may have said, to a few of you throughout my time communicating about this event that we're always happy to be a host, and we're delighted to have you here. So welcome to Hartford, welcome to our Career and Technical Center, and enjoy the space. And we're very excited about the work that this commission has been engaged in, and really interested in participating and gaining some insight into your work. So thank you all so much for being here. We're privileged to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, we will do quick roll call. I'll start with the folks in the room. I'm Megan Roy. I'm the chair of the commission and here as a former member of the Act 173 advisory group. This way.
I am Peter Conlon. I'm chair of the House Education Committee, and I'm here on behalf of the Vermont House.
I'm Mike Licklider, superintendent of the Harwood Unified Union School District and a representative of the Vermont Superintendents Association.
I'm Jay Nichols. I'm the executive director of the Vermont Principals Association, and I'm the designee for the VPA on the commission.
I'm Jeff Fenn, the executive director of Vermont PA, also the designated person from Vermont PA.
I am Jennifer Gentry, president of the Vermont State Board of Education.
Jennifer, and folks on the screen, I'll call your name. Just you blink on and off in the room. So Rebecca, you're first on my screen.
Sure. Hi, Rebecca Shamroff, the Deputy Commissioner of the Vermont Tax Department.
Elizabeth?
I'm Elizabeth Jennings. I am the Director of Finance and Operations for Addison Northwest School District, and I'm here representing VASBO, the Vermont Association of School Business Officials.
John? We can't hear you, John. This is John Castle, Executive Director of the Rural Education Collaborative, and he'll work on his audio. So, Nicole?
Hi, Nicole Mace. I'm a member of the Winooski School Board of Trustees, and I'm here as the designee of the Vermont School Boards Association.
And Zoe?
Good afternoon. I'm Zoe Saunders, Secretary of Education. I had hoped to be there in person, but a meeting ran over, so I knew I wouldn't get there in time. So I'm joining you virtually. Hi, everyone.
Thanks, Zoe. I think that is all of us. Before we do some quick business, are there any amendments to our agenda? None. Can I have a motion to approve our meeting minutes from May 19th? Thanks.
I'll second.
Thank you, Peter. Any discussion or changes? None. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Yes.
Okay. I'll do a roll call since that's okay. Mike, do you want to start?
Yes.
Stay.
Yes.
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 Nicole?
Yes.
Elizabeth?
Yes.
Rebecca?
Yes.
John? Thanks, John. Zoe?
I'll abstain.
Great, thanks. Motion carries, our minutes are approved. Well, we have a good group of folks in the room. We also have at least a few on the screen. So as we typically do for public comment, we will go back and forth between in person and on the screen. If you do want to share something with commission, please just introduce yourself. I think we will have enough time. If we go long, we'll start to kind of keep them short. So if you be concise, that would be great, but we'd love to hear from you.
Wi-Fi.
Yes. And if you are on the screen and you are interested, just raise your hand and we'll call on you in order. Anybody in the room want to start? Ken?
Anybody else?
Is that good? Sorry to make you turn around. Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ken Fredette from Wallingford and also from the Friends of Public Education in Vermont. Vermont Public Education. I don't worry. Vermont Public Education. Back in 2008 or 9, Peter Herman was president of the Vermont School Board Association, and he also served on the board of Thetford Academy. One night, the VSBA board was having a spirited discussion on something going on under the Golden Dome, and Peter said, the legislature should stay out of education matters. That should be left to duly elected school directors working with professional educators. This session so far, and especially the circus last Friday, proves that Peter was a man ahead of his time. Some years later, I was president of the VSBA. At one point, I was running for the Vermont House. There were concerns about accusations of conflict of interest. Should I get elected and then land on House Ed? Well, that didn't happen. But then Emily Long became VSBA president and got elected to the House and was assigned to House Ed. To my knowledge, it was never a problem. And I know why it wasn't a problem. That would be the Vermont Constitution. I'm pretty sure everyone at the table knows that education is the only government service mentioned in our Constitution. And there's good reason for that. Our founders recognized it as a singular best means to promote virtue among citizens, to protect and strengthen our democracy. Anybody supporting our public education system in Vermont has our Constitution backing them up. But conflicts of interest do exist. A classic example was when the chair of Senate Ed moved on last year, an overt supporter of independent schools slid into that position. Under his leadership, testimony to that committee session was disproportionately taken from private and independent schools. Then came the ultimate disregard for balanced representation. The assignments to the Senate side of the conference committee on H454. They derailed the entire process by coming in at the 11th hour with an absurd list of proposals that were nowhere to be found in any of the versions of 454 from the governor or either chamber, and that had blatant carve-outs for private and independent schools. This flies in the face of the Common Benefits Clause of the Vermont Constitution. At Friends Vermont Public Education, we believe, pursuant to that clause, that any schools that receive public funding must follow the same rules as public schools. There are private schools that by and large already do this, so others that say they can't doesn't pass the straight face test. Their constant drumbeat has been they are different, so different rules apply to them. Nope. No special carve-outs. Government services must provide common benefits for every citizen. No special advantages given to any individuals or groups, period. That should be the umbrella over every conversation the legislature or this commission has. To close, I want to be clear that my friends have friends, and I are aware that private and independent schools, especially the 4 historic academies, have long provided for the needs of some Vermont students. We appreciate that. We just want a level playing field. I have taken the same with respect to this public-private tug of war. It's not us or them. It's us and them. I appreciate what this commission has accomplished thus far and wish you the best in continuing your work. please always keep in mind that big umbrella, common benefits for all. And I expect everything else will fall into place nicely. Thank you.
Yeah. Don't see a hand on the screen at the moment. Is there anyone else in the room?
Sure. Katie Sutton, I'm the superintendent here in Hartford. I would be remiss if I neglected to mention that you are currently having a meeting in a space that is maybe going to need to be demolished depending upon what continues to occur in relation to PCBs and Act 74. So I just wanted to put out there that I, again, as well, really appreciate the work of the commission, and I really hope that the work also focuses on how we are paying for infrastructure and capital improvements, and that we're not forgotten about, because we are still actively in the pipeline of navigating this really complex situation without knowing where any funding or support is coming from. So I appreciate you all. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today.
Yes, go ahead.
Kathleen Gorman, retired educator, grandparent of a child in Hartford schools. I was disappointed to see on your spreadsheet that citation for class size was one of the few negative reports on class size. And I'm also curious about no references anywhere that I could find to the impact that consolidation of districts might have on busing for children. Long bus routes, time out of school, time out of other activities, and for some children, sick from long bus routes. Has that been mentioned anywhere? Or not?
I just want to.
So I come from a place where that was an issue. And so I have experience.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. We typically won't respond in the moment to questions that we gather, but we are absolutely listening and taking note. Can I ask a clarifying question? What you mean by spreadsheet?
The Excel spreadsheets, the one I'm referring to was, so there was one on the NEEP test results, National Education Test of Educational Progress. And the second one is one I'm referring to, and it was titled something. So a brainstorming, I think.
Oh, okay. So
Yes.
the brainstorming is familiar. Thank you. One part of it is I just want to be clear. One of the things that's been confusing around the commission in general is sort of the commission's work, the testimony that the legislature has taken, the agency documents and reports. And so I wanted to make sure that we understood what you're referring to. The brainstorming document that you were talking about, which I don't think had citations, wasn't sort of a working doc. It might have, but it was a working. It was a working document.
Don't remember, didn't write it down, but it was.
Right. So I just want to make sure that folks tuning in, especially anyone who's new to the commission work, back in November, December, as part of our initial report, their finance subcommittee began to brainstorm. I would not say
Probably me still.
you have to turn sound off.
I did.
Okay, sorry. So I would just encourage folks to refer to our website. The only report that this body has issued is on there. And so if there are citations or research being used by other entities, that's really important, but we wouldn't be able to help you respond to your question. Really what I'm trying to get at. I can't respond to your question about where.
I need that for your website.
Yeah, I guess I would just say folks can refer to the report. Other than that, this body really hasn't vetted a significant amount of research.
Yeah, we put it on.
Right.
There may be a lot of things that are on that website that are different resources that people have used or that they have posted. It doesn't mean that this commission has endorsed any of these things. Okay.
And I also, yes, exactly, and the sort of, I'm guessing that there's a connection between the article you're written and just the concept of class size. Those are proposals that have been generated through the administration, through the House, through the Senate. Our job is to react to those and give input. Those are not our proposals. And that's the other part of the clarification. That. Any other, I'm still not seeing any hands on the screen. So anyone else? There is an opportunity at the end of the meeting too. So if folks have listened to our discussion and want to share at the end, that's a possibility as well. Okay, I'm gonna move us on. So just to kind of intro our agenda, we will likely be flexible with the timing. We gave our bit of time today for a legislative update / discussion, not knowing where we would be. And knowing that at the time that we scheduled, or this meeting's been scheduled for a while, at the time we built the agenda for the meeting, there was a possibility that there would be some past legislation that redefined the work of the commission. So we left ourselves time to be able to respond to that and decide how we would do that. We do not have past legislation. So we will use as much of this time as we need to, and then we'll move into committees based on the will of the commission. But that's sort of just if you're wondering about the agenda. And Peter, as our sole rep from the legislature at the moment, if you don't mind kicking us off, you might be tired.
All right. So what I'm going to try to do is give an update as to what happened, where we are, perhaps on my own personal thoughts as to the commission and its ever evolving defined role, which until it is evolved and defined differently, it is still exactly what appears in statute. So many of you, I'm sure, were closely watching the last couple of days of the last week, particularly Friday, as we had our two committees of conference, one from the House featuring me, Representative Kornheiser, and Representative Taylor, who's the vice chair of the House Education Committee, and on the Senate, Senator Cummings, a member of the commission, Senator Bongartz, who is chair of the Senate Education Committee, and Senator Beck, who is the majority leader and is on the Senate Finance Committee. We did not get to an agreement as we had hoped in order to adjourn the session for good. But we also did that largely to be careful that we weren't making important legislation on the fly. We thought we were moving along very well, sort of closing out areas of agreement. We were making good progress. Granted, many of them were the easier parts of the overall proposal to agree with. On Friday, the Senate came to us with a new proposal to that was not included in either of the proposals to, among other things, there were a number of new additions, but this one in particular would have required that all school districts vote on their budget, and they could vote to spend 15% more or 15% less. Maybe it was 10% more, 10% less. I can't remember which. And this was literally at the 11th hour, and so it sort of left us having a debate as to whether it was a good idea at all to even make a decision on something so significant in so little time. I mean, our reaction on the House side was very much, this is an unvetted, sort of unmodeled proposal, and we did not feel comfortable at all moving forward. And, we can wonder what everybody's motivations here were, but ours was really to say we cannot do this in the waning hours. We were already getting lots of communication from our House members saying, we can't we can't be expected to vote at midnight on, significant changes that you're probably not even equipped to explain well on the House floor. That's absolutely true. So we basically had to say, we got to just stop, pause, regroup, and go back to our sort of separate sides and see how best to proceed. We also need to take some time to understand exactly what this new proposal, which they feel very strongly about including, means. Because if you are allowing folks to vote more or less, and you are really budgeting a certain amount for education, what happens if everybody goes to spend more? There's also the question of, if you peg your foundation formula to a number that empirical science has said this is the number that is needed to adequately educate a student in Vermont, that to spend less than that is to spend what would be defined as an inadequate amount on education. So we really need to sort of understand the parameters of and the potential sort of ramifications or consequences of entertaining in great seriousness that proposal. The Senate often referred to the third person at the table, which is the governor. The governor has certain requirements that he feels are important in a bill that he can sign. One is that we are not, that whatever we pass doesn't result in the state spending more than we are spending in 2025 numbers. There is still some question as to what the House put forward and that the Senate also put forward in their proposal, if that number does or does not, based on a number of assumptions. And our joint fiscal office and the folks at the AOE and others have been really sort of tearing apart the assumptions in all of the proposals to really understand if in fact it does cost more or does not cost more. We continue to also be dealing with the sort of finance side of things. We know that Vermonters are asking for significant property tax relief. The House has put forward a plan that would use a homestead exemption rather than the property tax credit system that we have. And before, I won't go into the details of it, but it's fair to say that it leaves most Vermonters in a better financial situation than the current system that we have today. But it also is contingent on having more than just two property classifications, property tax classifications, rather than, full-time home and 2 acres and everything else. It would try to categorize more. What's a second home? What's manufacturing? What's a mixed use, et cetera, and allowing more levers to sort of make sure that home site or homestead owners don't have to bear an unreasonable burden in funding education. So what that looks like and how that is implemented also remains a point of discussion. So anyway, we have been, we will continue. We left there, I would say, it's on our side, frustrated, but also knowing that this wasn't the end. In other words, we didn't adjourn saying we're done for the legislative season and we failed. We will be going back in mid-June. I'm sure there will be a lot of work done between now and then to understand everything better. And we'll be voting time to try to get to a yes on all sides, including the governors. Within all of this continues to be the mission of the Commission on the Future of Public Education. And, I know that the sort of continued uncertainty of the role of this group weighs on all of us and our ability to be a resource and sort of the vision moving forward. first of all, sorry that it is that way. It's been really hard. When we created the bill that created the commission, we were in a different world, in a different place. Things have obviously changed. However, we continue to see that it's an important part of the puzzle. And I guess, you know, as I think, and I'm really speaking personally more than trying to represent the position of anybody, that, you know, for me, the commission has a couple of areas to sort of be part of. And that is, this conversation has to continue no matter what we come up with in the legislature, how we think about Vermont's education system in the future. This group can continue to play a vital role in. It's going to be an evolving process, but we are, no matter which sort of version we go with, it's going to be a multi-year implementation with undoubtedly adjustments and tweaks along the way. And so to the extent that this body can help provide the vision and the roadmap is helpful, very helpful. And really to help continue to make the case as to why Vermont needs to take some steps forward in education changes and education transformation. Though that may not be an idea that everybody universally agrees with, but I continue to believe that, you know, Vermont needs to reckon with the fact that we're a much different state than we were 40 years ago, and especially in our demographics. And that, you know, we do need to make some changes. Property tax burden and affordability remains a major problem, but also just the assurance that we are delivering a high quality education to every student, that every student has an equal opportunity. The case continues to need to be made, and I think this is the group that needs to help make it. And I also think more in a sort of more on the ground, detailed way. I think about the fact that it is very likely that no matter what comes out of legislature this year, the legislature next year, we are going to be moving toward a different looking education system. And I think we can all agree that that probably includes larger districts, whether they are much larger or just larger, is different. And I think that is an enormous amount of change for people. And I think this body could be very helpful in sort of helping set the course for what these new districts should and could look like, from governance down to maintaining the connection to local communities, and how we can maintain what I think Vermonters hold very sort of dear and sacred in how we govern our schools, which is local control, in a transition to something that is not going to look the same as it does today. So those are sort of my personal views on the role of the commission, and also just sort of restating that until it's any different, we still do have a statute that governs the role of the commission today, and we have an ongoing and continued work by our public engagement efforts. So sorry to come here on June 2nd with still a lot of question marks up in the air. Personally, sorry, just because I also am having to live the reality of that. But I certainly am glad we've set aside a significant amount of time in our agenda, because personally, I'm very happy to hear from everybody on the commission with any thoughts they have.
Thanks, Peter. Well, with that, I'll open it up to commission discussion. It has been helpful in the past for everyone to be able to share their thoughts. Anyone is sort of ready to share that, feel free to raise your hand or jump in or ask questions. I mean, there maybe we actually start with just questions, clarifying questions, things that maybe Peter can help clear up.
It's too bad Senator Cummings isn't here. She would be able to speak from the Senate perspective of things. So I'm going to do my best not to give too one-sided responses or points of view.
So, start from there?
Yep.
Clarifying questions. Can you talk a little bit about the difference between the two committees and where you sort of tentatively ended up in terms of boundary drawing, and what that would look like, Representative Collins?
Yes, so parts of the two bills that came out, and they were in fact quite similar, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everybody kept sort of, it seemed like all the bodies kept moving things forward in hopes that the next level would meet their concerns. So when it comes to the how do we move ahead with drawing new district lines, we essentially combined the two proposals and kept much of the membership that was included in the House committee, answered a concern of the Senate and the governor of having additional legislators on there, so they actually held a majority. So I think the final agreement, and these agreements aren't really final, but that there would be 3 people appointed from each body of members. And then each body would then get 2 appointments from sort of the educational community, and the governor would get 1. It would be a separate task force, no longer a subcommittee of the future public education, but with a requirement that it work closely with the public engagement process of this group. It was also, and this is we all agreed on that much better resource than the proposal that we came out with, and without sort of having to work through the commission's budget to make things happen. With an idea that they would produce no more than 3 maps for the legislature to consider come January.
Can I ask another question? I already know the answer to this for the public.
Yeah.
Could you talk a little bit about the difference in the end on the funding piece in terms of base education amount between where your conference committee was as compared to where you think maybe the Senate was? So this is a little clearer.
So there were deviations from on the Senate side from what was proposed. So we stuck to what we proposed originally, which is a 15,000 plus foundation formula base amount plus the weights that had been empirically derived for different studies. The Senate essentially agreed with that. However, they wanted to see the ability to vote more or less than that amount by, I can't remember if they were proposing 15% or 10% on either side of that. There was also, there was also a desire on their side for a secondary school weight, or was a high school weight. That was not proposed in either the governor's proposal or in the House proposal, because there had been, between the consultant the legislature hired and the different consultant that the AOE hired, there was neither side was recommending a high school weight. The other side, the Senator Baumgart's on the other side, felt that that was an important part, especially in terms of maintaining the tuition amount that would be going to independent schools that are approved for receiving public dollars. He said essentially, we have agreed to the concept that the money follows the student, but because many of our independent schools are only secondary schools, in other words, they don't have sort of that money to spread across 12 grades and the cost of various grades, that there should be consideration for that. And then there was ongoing concern about how we fund CTE education. And, there's a certain amount of trepidation in saying that's something we'll deal with next year. We feel confident that that needs to be thought about carefully, and probably can't do it this year, but need to do it next year. As anybody who's involved in education that involves CTEs, it's confusing. We've got different governance systems. We've got CTEs that are based in independent schools. We have CTEs that are parts of public high school. We have CTEs that are governed independently. And so the funding is very challenging, and that really needs more time. You know, after all, and that'll just sort of bring up another major sort of dividing line. And that is implementation as to when this takes place. But regardless of sort of who gets their way, none of this takes place for at least 3 years. And some of this is going to have to be solved in the upcoming years, special ed being a very significant part of that. And so the more we can sort of make sure that that is part of what happens, probably the better. But again, you can't tell a future legislature what to do. Yeah, I'm not sure I got to your point.
I think you did. The flush out the CTE part a little bit more, especially since the building we're in. There was discussion also earlier, not related to this necessarily, in the session about the possibility of looking at CTE, also looking at programming. Because if we look at some of the data, not empirical, but anecdotal, we know there are some programs that cost more than others. So I think there's a lot of support, maybe even both sides, that there needs to be some real firm analysis done on how we fund CTEs to make sure that we don't underfund an area that we know is critical to the future of our state.
Yes, probably that, you know, we start moving toward the role of the AOB versus the role of the legislature in terms of determining programming that's appropriate for CTE centers. But it is, I mean, it's, you know, if we think of a future world where we have larger districts, and every one of those districts has a CTE center in it, then it just becomes a program of the district. And does that work within a foundation formula? And then, of course, there's all the additional federal funding that goes to programming as well. And so how to blend all that together and make it work is something that definitely needs to be worked out.
Thank you.
I have actually, Zoe, you go, and then I'll ask my more logistical.
I hope you're going to correct any misstatements I made.
Well, I was just going to respond directly to the CTE question and make sure that the commission was aware of resources that we do have in place, analyzing the current funding for CTE and also the programmatic outcomes. So 2 years ago, the General Assembly contracted with APA Consulting to begin that study to recommend funding and governance reform. The Agency of Education has continued that work over the last year. And so we now have 2 years that have culminated with 2 reports that build upon each other and have a really localized in a well-grounded understanding of our current CTE system. So I would just encourage the commission to read those studies and the recommendations that came out of those reports. I think it'd be really valuable for our discussion. So I'll make sure to follow up that the commission members have both of those studies.
Thanks, Zoe. My question was a little more logistic, but it's related to Jay's question of as the current status, which I understand is changing, obviously, but can you talk a little bit about the role of the commission? So you answered one of my questions, which is the connection or no longer. The current discussions don't have a formal connection between redistricting and the commission, but in the, I guess, the last Senate passed version, the commission's refined charge focused on governance, essentially role of the state board, role of the agency. I think it actually also had a big health insurance focus, and I wondered if you could speak to, or what did that preserve? I guess the question is, what is the role of the commission in the current legislation? I'll have another question for you later about what you think it should be, but in terms of that part.
The Senate came up with a proposal about what they felt should be the less narrow role that the House had actually proposed originally. And part of that was to analyze health insurance and the cost and what it is as a burden on education. We essentially rejected that because really that's what the finance subcommittee did. And I'm not sure it needs to be redone, and I'm not sure that there isn't anything new to say about it. Health insurance is a incredible burden on school expenses, and we know that. I can't remember what their other proposal was. But it seemed perfectly within the work of the commission. None of which, of course, now, until the time as we actually do change it, we're still under our same statute. And then I, have proposed that we expand a little further beyond just state level governance, whatever the Senate proposed, but to really talk about what does a future state look like and how can we preserve a larger district and its connection to the communities that it's serving. And how it's governed, quite honestly, because we have to make decisions like how many school board members, how do they continue to be connected to their communities, how's the district connected to their communities.
Great, thank you. Nicole?
Thanks. I had just a question about process. So, will there be scheduled, recorded, transparent meetings of this conference committee between now and June 16th? And how, if at all, can the commission provide any assistance? I mean, it was shocking to me, frankly, watching the conversation on Friday, because proposals seemed to come out of nowhere or were being recycled from past legislative sessions, right? So I think having the stakes of this could not be higher. The public interest in this could not be higher. Having a very transparent process for making these kinds of policy decisions is important, but also understanding what are the guardrails of this process. Is it like anything goes at this point and new ideas are going to come to the table? How will those be vetted? So that's just sort of the process. And then, I shared some thoughts with you, Peter, at your request on sort of the future role of the commission. I do think it's important for us to talk about that, and if it would add value, potentially, maybe not necessarily take a vote, but give some sort of broader group consensus around, based on what we see, what value could the commission add in the context of a major reform effort. And then just like as an aside, again, watching that conversation on finance, circling back to why are we doing this seems really important, because some of the ideas that were put on the table felt like, why don't we just keep our current, like, how is this an improvement over the situation we have right now? So, yeah, some thoughts, some questions.
I'll try to maybe work from the last first. In terms of any input that the commission wants to provide about the future of the commission is definitely welcome. The process going forward is, yes, it will be open. Any meetings will be well publicized. There's certainly enough people watching us to know that there's great interest. Nothing has been decided yet. We have major scheduling issues, including my own. I'm going to go see my first grandchild in Chicago in a week. So I want to make sure I can do that.
Congrats.
Thank you. So let me just call that to be determined. Both sides are meeting this week, just from a leadership point of view, to say, okay, how do we move forward? And then, of course, we will potentially we have 2 days scheduled in Montpelier. But I think that there will also be work going on behind the scenes, but not decision-making or anything, but just like, okay, what does this proposal mean? Having, that modeling and the analysis done for that. And I will, when I know more, I'll do my best to share it with the commission.
Thank you. Elizabeth and then Mike.
Yeah, so I think kind of Nicole did cover one of those because my first question was more about process and it seems like that's been answered. I am a little curious and I don't know whether you can even answer this considering all of the ideas and proposals that were being kind of thrown out on Friday, but I've kind of lost sight of where special education funding has landed in any of these potential proposals, and I'm just curious if you could speak to, is there specifically one way that all of the proposals are kind of dealing with special education funding, or is there still a division about how that's going to be worked into the formula?
It being so complicated that it often gets sort of pushed aside as a topic, and then we lose track of actually what we had proposed. I'm pretty sure that the House version of the proposal calls for a study and to sort of deal with it next year. There are weights that are included in pretty much all of the studies. But there's a lot of concern, I know, from everybody about how do you, if you take a disability such as autism spectrum disorder, and it is in fact it is a spectrum of disability. How do you actually put a single weight upon that? So I think special ed continues to be in our proposal, if I remember correctly, awaiting further study by the agency. But not ignored and not thought about it, because it is such a key part of the whole equation, and especially extraordinary costs.
Elizabeth, I might have jumped the gun. Did you have other questions? Okay, Mike.
Mine returns back to the conversation we had with the commission. We mentioned healthcare was inserted by the Senate. And I've seen various timelines of when the commission would cease to exist in the final report. Just wondering from the conversations in conference committee where you were at the time Friday, and maybe some of your own personal thoughts of what you think would be important. When I saw healthcare introduced and looked at the timeline, and it really concerned me because that alone could take a year to study.
Yeah. Well, or we sort of know that it is, other than this body is not going to solve the high price of healthcare in Vermont. All you can do is argue the way the two sides currently negotiate. And so I don't, so I think we all understand the problem. In terms of like the closing date of this group, it came in, it is that there have been lots of dates thrown around. I can see absolutely no value in ending it when we're this far along, anytime before December.
Thanks, Mike.
There's still value to add.
I'll go to Zoe in a second, but just a prompt to the commission members. After we do questions, we will go around the table and the screen to sort of also give thoughts, reactions, ideas. So be prepping for your turn is really what I'm saying. Zoe. Jen.
Thank you. I was just going to respond directly to the question around special education cost. So as the administration is looking at the proposal, we're really evaluating the entire cost of the system. And it's really important for us to understand special education and career and technical education as we look at this holistically. So we are doing modeling as it relates to the 3 weights that are proposed within the bill. And we've also been in conversation with the U.S. Department of Education as we're contemplating adjustments to the way that we fund special education, and also ensuring that we're mindful of achieving maintenance of fiscal support in terms of what the state is required to provide year after year. I will say that the current proposal does cost more than our current system. That is something we can say based on the way that the funding is being applied within the current scope of the bill. And then, and also special education, we're costing at a higher level as well. And some of that is ensuring that we're accounting for the local share for special education currently in our system. So all of this is very complex as we're moving forward to contemplating these large reforms. And we are working very closely with the Joint Fiscal Office as well to make sure that in this modeling we are accounting for those assumptions. There are some places that the bill is silent on policy choices. And in those scenarios, we're trying to estimate kind of what that cost would be, assuming no change for the system. So just wanted to be able to signal that we are working in partnership on that and thinking holistically around the cost of the system, including the education opportunity payment and categorical aid, and some of these adjustments that are being contemplated to fund special education.
There are some parts of the bill that are agreed to that, are some, frankly, great moves forward. One thing we do is we resource the State Board of Education up to a level that they have never seen. But really, part of that is to help with the goal of defining the roles of the Agency of Education and the role of the State Board of Education. So that they can each sort of dive into the things that they do, the things that the other should be doing. And really, this has been talked about for years, but between instability at the AOE and no resources for the state board, I think both sides and everybody are looking forward to that work going on. State board.
Quick comment about the then Department of Education. I've been around long enough to know that when they had Challenge for Change, they lost 50 positions. So I know the bill that's kicking around the versions of 5, 6 new people. Sounds like a lot. It is. It's appreciated, but it's nowhere near where they were to provide resources to Zoe and her team to do that. So I mean, I think there's room to improve that. To ask the AOE to do more, they need to do more with more. So thank you for that. I realized that it was pretty that proposal. Couple of quick things, Peter, you said I'm bummed that Ann's not here because you said that the Senate was very beholden to its idea that it came forward with late in the day on Friday. And it said, I was there, and she said something about, this was sort of a cafeteria in that conversation. So is that sincerity and belief in that proposal still there, or is that still being worked? And you may not be able to comment, and that's fine, but it just struck me as, I think there was some belief in that and maybe not shared by everybody on that side of the table, at least audibly stated that day. Right.
Yeah, so I can't specifically speak to their process for coming up with that or that. But what I can say is that this is where politics enters the process. And so to have any bill emerge from either body, you got to get a majority of the voters in each body. And education is just notoriously difficult because it's not about party, it's about sort of the system that you want to protect. Whether it be independent school choice or small rural schools, including small high schools, or schools that are at scale and have a broad breadth of offerings. That tends to govern people's points of view more so than whatever party they belong to. And so I would say that the word from the Senate as a whole is that in order to generate enough votes to pass anything, that some sort of ability to vote more or less dollars and just vote period on what you're spending is important. Now, what does that mean? Like, what happens if you vote no all the time. And you have a foundation formula that guarantees you funding. Or do you not vote and just receive 100%? That's all very challenging in this sort of format.
Right, I would just compliment, Representative Cornhusker. She did understand those, articulated those questions really well, on Friday, so, impressive. And my last comment is, I think this body now, where the House and Senate are, and where it goes, where they'll end up, I think we have more increased relevance. And I hope we appreciate that, and, all those folks on the screen, but, with some renewed vigor.
Yeah, I'm just curious, and I don't know if you would do this, but other states that have moved to a foundation formula, what was the timeline from when they decided that they wanted to make a change until they determined what that change was, and how is that compared to 4.5 months, now 5 months in the next year session?
I don't know the answer to that. The only thing I know about moving to a foundation formula in other states is they generally did it to increase funding for their school system. And so we are, forging a new path here, is using that as a conceptual measure. So I know in Mississippi, they talked about, they implemented, one of the southern states where they implemented this, and they spent $200 million more. But that was the purpose.
Because I guess what I'm getting at is this is a monumental change, and there are so many moving pieces and so many different things that need to be considered. Special ed, CTEs, and rural schools and independent school, like there's so many moving pieces here. I'm glad I'm not a legislator because it's a Herculean task that I think you guys are engaging in with, and we're doing what we're doing, but it feels like a lot, and it seems like whatever happens, it was always going to be rushed at the end.
Well, it is, no matter what emerges, it's still going to be a multi-year phase in with chapters 1, 2, and 3 still to be, or 2 and 3 still to be written.
Just a quick Google chat. New York implemented its current foundation form aid formula in 2007, and it was fully funded in the 2023-24 school year. So decades.
But I guess my question isn't so much like the rollout, but sort of the design. Like, how long did they take to design it?
I thought that was interesting.
Yeah.
It says here, it can take, the foundation formula in general, school funding can take years or even decades for states to fully implement this due to a variety of factors. It starts talking about political process, complexity, political impact, all those things that we're currently struggling with.
One of the things that the Senate had in their proposal that we fully agreed with, and frankly, they had neglected to put it in our own, was that, once we sort of get there, there's a certain phase in, so that you're not all of a sudden getting lots of money, but you get that gets phased in, but also if that district happens to be spending more than what the foundation formula is, that would ratchet down over a 5-year period.
Cool. Sorry. Cool.
Yeah, I mean, I am curious about whether there's an opportunity to treat the foundation formula design similarly to the design of new districts, and recognize that cobbling something together in a 2-week period or 2-day period is not in the best interest of the system, will likely result in some adjustments immediately in the future. I mean, there was serious deja vu for me happening on Friday in terms of, allowable growth is back on the table. That experiment failed in 2015. So I'm just wondering if there's an option to, again, part of what even this commission has grappled with is, are we going to do this or are we not going to do it? So what the legislature could answer this session is, we are going to move to larger districts. We are going to move to a foundation formula. We are going to move to a different way of assessing quality, monitoring quality, et cetera. but the details need more time. And whether it's this commission, whether it's joint fiscal, there needs to be a more time to work out the details, because what I have observed in the last few months is we're laying a foundation formula on top of existing structures. So the modeling has people panicked about communities that are going to see 22, 33-cent tax rate increases, irrespective of how long you phase that in. That's still a problem. What role voters have in determining whether to overspend, underspend. I mean, these are big questions that are not answered, and I think we've lost sight of why are we even doing this. And so I just wonder, I know the governor has set an expectation that something's going to happen this year. You're already buying down the rates for the current fiscal year. I have real concerns about making decisions on the structure of and the design of a foundation formula the way things are currently unfolding.
I would just say, I'm not sure I would say that the design of the proposal for the foundation formula was cobbled together in the last couple of days. I mean, it was part of the House proposal that, took weeks to sort of put together. It was based on the governor's proposal, which also was backed by the APA consultant work. Adding new wrinkles at the last minute, that's a different discussion for sure.
But I think those wrinkles came about as a result of some legitimate concerns about how the House's proposal might play out, because the House didn't do a lot of modeling, because the idea is the foundation formula gets implemented once the new districts are in place. So that was I just think as more time has passed, more questions have come up. The governor's proposal was backed by APA, but there were a lot of details that weren't available to us about exactly how would this work and what would it mean in terms of the cuts that would be needing to make or whatever to suddenly save that amount of money in our education fund. So yes, I know that it wasn't all last minute, but there are unresolved questions that are very important that I think deserve to be resolved.
Well, and your comment about that we are trying to understand a foundation formula about a future state and yet lay it over our current state has been one of the challenges throughout this, because people say, oh my God, our district is going to lose this much money. Well, it's like, you have to remind them that that's not what's going to exist when the foundation formula takes place. You almost sort of start begging these districts to stop modeling because it's scaring people, and it is not, the two aren't meant to happen at the same time. Current districts and future foundation formula. So that definitely has been a challenge going through the process.
So I think this is a good segue, but I want to ask a clarifying question for you, Peter, before we officially segue into for right now, we exist in our perspective on even just the substance of the conversation right now feels important. So I want to be able to go around and have people reiterate that. My question is and I don't know who is our audience right now, I think we have thoughts about our future purpose and our future charge, which I think we'll dig into, but for right now, is our audience you, because you're here and captive and you're on the conference, and therefore our comments are, Peter, please consider these things in your committee, and maybe it's both, or will the commission be listened to if we actually craft a summary of this and distribute it? That has been our practice, but before then we had some committees that we gave it to. Quite frankly, I'm not sure whether or not those committees did anything with it is up to them. So for purposes, so people know sort of right now, are we informing you as a conference committee member, or is our voice, and I don't mean to say that that's not strong, but is our voice stronger than that?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, first of all, everybody who's on the commission represents voices that we are hearing from. Anyway, to the extent that this body, which actually represents many of those voices, can sort of have a unified voice, that probably is important and worth listening to. The process that we have in the legislature is still the process that we had, and that we have a conference committee, we have sort of a deadline. And to the extent that we have our process, which is when you get down to just 3 people on either side trying to bring 2 proposals together, that at least one side isn't very happy with, even in the version that they passed. We're in a very odd situation. However, I guess I would agree with Jeff Bannon that does that make the commission even more relevant than it has been, which is something that they have struggled with. I think all voices that represent a diverse group of opinions, as opposed to every diverse opinion, is definitely helpful.
That's helpful. I think I'm gonna issue our prompt for this sort of twofold. One is you are informing Peter, who sits on the conference committee, and when it comes to so sharing your feedback on the current proposals or things you would want people to be aware of, Peter will take those as a member of that commission. And while we are doing this, I think if there are some common unified things, we could, what I think I heard you say is, if there are a couple of key things that we actually agree on, then it would be useful for us as a body to, whether that's a straw poll or an action, and not suggesting we generate a report, but I'm saying if every single one of us has a similar thing, then that's worth us being, speaking as a body around. And then what we are all saying as individuals is still useful to you as a committee member.
Yes, I would say that I would agree with all that, but without the commission going too far over the line of being political.
Agreed. Yep. So with that, just like we've done in the past, you can pass if you would like to pass, but the prompt is, it could just be any reaction or thoughts that you think the General Assembly should have as they do their work right now. I think we should particularly have thoughts about the future role of the commission. I think that's worthwhile to share. So I don't know if I gave everyone enough wait time, and if someone wants to volunteer, otherwise we'll just go around the table. Mike is unfortunately like directly across from me. Do you want to start?
Sure.
Okay.
What I would say is I think timeline and process are critical. We talked about, Jennifer brought up the question about places that have implemented a fair funding formula. I was superintendent in a place that did in 2016, and they're still working on it. They're still moving into that. I would say that there's a lot of debate, and I think there's a lot of anxiety, anxiousness on the part of superintendents, principals, and teachers. I had a conversation with a teacher earlier today about this whole process. And I think there's anxiety because the process of educating kids continues in this, and in an increasingly complex, difficult budgeting environment for schools. So I would say in all things, I think everyone agrees, all parties, everyone at this table, obviously the governor, the House, the Senate, that we need to make sure that our future system looks different than our present and our past system. But I would say we've talked about 3 general concepts: vision, governance, and funding. And I think sometimes in discussions this year, those 3 have been flipped in different orders. And I think if I look back to the original charge of this commission last year, vision was first. And I think we have to remember that we first need to have a solid vision for what our system is, what we can and can't deliver. how we want it to be attractive for 100% of kids in the state. Public education, students who are in public education, students who are going to independent schools. We have to make sure that we are building a system that's sustainable for everyone. I would say then the next piece is governance, what that looks like, what it looks like for districts, what it looks like for schools, for employees. And then the funding model has to follow that, because the funding, there's been a lot of discussion, and I would also agree. I think Representative Kornheiser has really illustrated that well, and the complexities of that funding model. And anytime you change any one of those components in governance, it impacts moving forward your funding. So what I would I think my thoughts are, I think we need to continue our work. And I think our work really needs to start with that piece of what is the vision moving forward before we can move to other pieces. And I would just also encourage everyone to think through timelines and processes, because in the end, our children are depending on the work we do.
Next, we'll go around in the room and then we'll go to the screen.
And so I appreciate everything Mike just said. Without spending a lot of time on it, I was pretty disappointed in Senate Conference Committee providing new unvetted proposals at the end of an hour. I thought that those proposals, at least in part, were for political reasons. I realize it's part of the process, but I did think it was very helpful. Just to cut to the chase, I'd rather do nothing than do something bad. I think if we underfund the current system, we hurt programs and ultimately students. I want to make sure we engage in upstream thinking instead of downstream thinking, and I've heard a lot of downstream thinking. We got to cut, we got to cut, we got to cut. Make change of this magnitude might cost more in the short term, or cost the same amount. But I think it easily could save money in the percentage of increase of public education spending over time. Which is why I think we need to look at taxing second homeowners and others who have the means more than the average working Vermonter. The House plan has a path forward to at least start looking at doing that. The Senate plan, as far as I can tell, doesn't appear to happen. The House plan also protects more Vermont full-time residents and homeowners that are working, what I call working Vermonters, will get less of a hit on the House plan unless I'm reading the spreadsheets wrong. I also think transition is going to take time. We want to be careful we don't rush into something without transitional work, because that can upset the entire system that I want to remind everybody is already under tremendous turmoil. Many federal pressures are on the system, and we just need to be really careful moving forward. And I think as far as the commission, we need to continue to listen to the public, share any feedback, help make sure the process is as transparent as possible. That's all I'll say for now. Thank you.
Mike, Jay, yes. But I'll add to, so I too am concerned, speed with which it seems like we're moving ahead, or also moving ahead. Concerned about last minute proposals being in projects next happen about it. We have no idea what their effect will be. So I'm concerned, and as Jay just said, I think I'll say it differently. I think the first attitude would be do no, above all else, do no harm. We have a robust and good system of educating kids in the state of Vermont. Do better, sure, but I walked in with Jenny, and I'll share that. I learned this last night via text that the, okay, you said this, you're at the tech center here, we're in the tech center. The River Valley Tech Center in Springfield won the National Robotics Championship last night. And that doesn't happen by accident. People invested in that. Teachers work with kids, administrators gave them support and time out of class and all those things that happen. And the school board down there gave them the resources with which to succeed and actually win the national championship. That is pretty cool. And Springfield. So hats off to them. I do worry that we're rushing along, and I would say that what we heard in the fall was the property taxes were too high. We wanted relief from the property taxes. And I'm not sure anything I've heard so far really lower property taxes. And I think that's something that we've been concerned about at Vermont and EA. And so my members who pay taxes like everybody else, they too are concerned with property taxes and understanding. And so I think one of the things we've been pushing for is to an income tax, not a property tax. I'm a broken record on this, I know. And so I'll leave it at that. And lastly, Katie, again, to you, school construction hasn't been funded in these proposals. And if we're going to change governance and change where we deliver education to kids, and that means we're going to close 2 schools, one of 125 kids and another with 125 kids, and we've got to put them into another school that only can house 150 kids. We've got to build a school really quickly to meet the needs of a more regional. Those are numbers just picked out of thin air, obviously, but school construction has got to be part of, and funded school construction has got to be part of the calculus here going forward. So that's something we feel strongly about. I know my members are concerned. They don't want to be in 19th century schools trying to deliver a 21st century education, 19th or 20th century, early 20th century. That'll stop. Thank you. And thanks for your work, Peter. And also, I know the last Thursday, Friday could not have been easy, and for Saturday, I hope you get home safely. Slept nights and rest.
Thank you. Yeah, just to touch on a couple of, this feels like change, just points. What I've always heard is that the end of the legislative session is always a flurry of activity, and you never know what's going to happen and how things are going to shake out. My concern about that approach or reality with education is that, as I said earlier, there are so many moving pieces here. It's hard to predict the effect that, switching one lever is going to have in the short term, intermediate term, and long term. And that concerns me because at the end of the day, we want to make sure that our students are taken care of. And so another thing that I often go back on is the first time that I met Megan is we were working on, the state board of ed was updating Series 2200 to implement Act 173. And Megan and I had a great conversation and didn't know each other, but just kind of agreed on the principle that it's better to get things done right than to get them done quickly. And I return to that comment a lot because, and I think with kids, they get one chance to go through, 3rd grade. I want to make sure that they're doing this right. And that is paramount importance to me. And the other thing too, is I haven't seen any property tax savings for people, which, if I hear the taxpayers, what they're really concerned about is the tax rate. That's what really led to the commission being formed and the work that the legislature is undertaking right now. And I think, for this to be considered a success by Vermonters, we don't want to hurt our students, but it would be great if there's some sort of property tax reduction. Jennifer. Thoughts that I would share without being repetitive. I agree with a lot of folks, but I would echo the timeline part. I think and I don't say that out of, I know that there is a perception that people who want to slow it down are actually just trying to not do anything. And that if you slow it down, they won't. That's not at all what I mean. I think I would agree we need changes. And I am concerned that we don't really understand just how much we are potentially upending the system by doing this quickly. And so I would echo the timeline concerns and just reinforce that that's not because I think we shouldn't do anything. I want to take a grain size down. I think it's important for committees to understand this is specific to special education. I understand and support that both proposals charge the agency, and I think the agency is doing it anyway, with studying this deeply about how we deliver special education. It is warranted and overdue. There's some pretty significant mechanical pieces about switching to a foundation formula related to special ed that I'm not sure are on people's radar. For example, if money follows students, and that includes the weights associated with them, but the LEA responsibility for delivering special education remains with that district. So if you take a student who receives a weighted amount to go to, let's say, an independent school, but it would be true if it were a public school too, they're getting an increased amount of money. The responsibility to provide the service is legally the LEA and functionally is shared between those two entities. So that's going to make that really complicated. And I'm not sure that the conversation so far has been about anything other than the money. So who makes those decisions is really important. A challenge that was never resolved under Act 173 is that when students go to an independent school and they have disabilities and they're on an IEP, they can build back their cost, but the district only receives the census grant. Essentially, that wouldn't be resolved in a weighted foundation formula because an amount of money would go, I guess actually what I should reframe that needs to be changed under a foundation formula. So that if the amount of money weighted for a student with a disability is following that student, I would offer that school should then be fully responsible for providing those services, other than excess costs and other things. So suffice to say, without going down a really small grain size, there's a lot unresolved in special ed and not just what's going to be studied. And then this was actually said in the conference committee, but I would elevate it. Special education has to be provided. If districts who choose, if there was a mechanism, which I do not support, but if there was a mechanism where a community could vote to underfund education, special education is just going to take a bigger and bigger portion of that pie, and it's going to further restrict what's left for the rest of the students. So I could talk for a long time about that, but I'll leave it there. And then I just support the idea that this commission could be really useful to this process moving forward, particularly around what that transition looks like. We are engaged in conversations about the impact, what others think about it. I'm a parent of school age kids. I know a couple of us are, not many of us. I don't think that my counterpart parents really know what all of this means. So I worry about that. And I think that we have an important role moving forward. But I think that role needs to be meaningful. I don't think we should be given a task to chase. The healthcare analysis felt a little bit like that. I would not find that work meaningful, but so that my 2 cents. And I think we're on to the people on the screen. Rebecca, you're first on my screen.
Hi, yeah, sure. So just, I guess I'll speak to the property tax side of the house. Of course, we have also been concerned about potentially significant property tax increases in districts that are currently relatively low spenders under a new foundation formula. In the governor's original foundation formula, we are looking at much lower spending levels as baked into that formula as we achieve scale. So we were able to anticipate lower tax rates across Vermont, including in those communities that are historically lower spenders. So, as the policy discussion has evolved, I think in necessary ways, in some cases, we're in some higher spending scenarios where it does become increasingly important for us to think about other tools for mitigating property tax increases in various communities. This includes, really thoughtfully designed income sensitivity program, and it's been exciting to see the administration and both bodies kind of aligning around a homestead exemption, which is just much more commonplace across the country and does a better job targeting property tax support towards lower value homes, which today don't see a ton of support from our property tax credit system. And also becomes important to think about the supplemental district spending a little differently too, if we're having a foundation formula that matches more today's spending rates. What's the right amount of supplemental spending, and how can that be strategically deployed? So those are kind of the things that are on our minds, looking at the next couple of weeks, how to weigh in and be helpful there for both bodies as these conversations continue.
Elizabeth, you're next.
So I have a number of ideas. One thing I just wanted to point out is looking at this commission and hearing all of the comments that everyone seems to be sharing. It's really, really impressive to me at how much commonality we all really actually have, because everything I'm hearing said I agree with. Like, I'm not, I'm not disagreeing with anything that's coming out of any of these members from this commission. So that's really impressive. That means we've really all kind of studied this and paid attention and have all of the same awareness of each of those different facets of this process. And that's very impressive to me. I'm also very thankful that no fast decisions and votes happened on Friday night at midnight, as someone mentioned on this call. But at the same time, I share Nicole, I think it was, that shared the deep concern about even June 16th could be a fast timeline to making some of those really huge decisions. And I think Jay also said something about, would rather not do anything than make a mistake, a huge mistake, and put something into motion that basically is to the detriment of students and causes harm in some way to their opportunities. To say something a little bit different, I think I would like to express concern in regards to something Jeff mentioned about construction aid. Just kind of hearing in the field a lot of folks talking about where are we going to cut even as we move into not knowing whether it's going to be a foundation formula, what that foundation formula is going to be, not knowing what the funding is going to be, or if any of that takes effect before the governance structure changes, right? So timeline as far as sequence of events and what happens when. But in regards to that, one of the first places folks are going to cut because they don't want to take away opportunities for students is the buildings, right? So some of these buildings, these facilities are already in deferred maintenance situations. And so if you further cut in those areas on cleaning and maintenance or any kind of construction project that needs to happen, like a roof leaking or those kind of things, you're going to further deteriorate the status of those buildings. And ultimately, at some point, that does affect students, even though it's not a direct correlation, but they have to have an adequate place to learn and have a cleanly, safe place to learn. So I just want to push out a little bit of concern about the status of our facilities as we move through this timeline, whatever that timeline ends up being, with really no concept for how the facilities are going to be handled.
Thanks, Elizabeth. John, you're next. If we haven't tested your audio in a while. No, we can't hear you. If you want, it's up to you, but I'll check my email before we finish. And if you want me to share something, I will be happy to do that. Sorry about that. Nicole?
With respect to the foundation formula, I've said this already, but I do think more work needs to be done. And in particular, I'm interested in options for, I think we can take a little more time, come out next session with a more comprehensive reform of how we fund education that has more buy-in and understanding. I mean, clearly the Senate folks, I'm not sure, they didn't buy into what they passed, at least the folks on the conference committee. And I do think there's room for more conversation, deep conversation around overspending the foundation amount, underspending the foundation amount, and different revenue sources. The clear message from voters was reduce our property taxes. I don't believe any of the proposals really meet that charge or respond to that. And I think there are ways to achieve that goal without doing harm to our education system. So more time, I think. And I want to echo Megan's comments around, it's not more time so as not to do something. It's more time to get it right. I do, in terms of the role of the commission, I think having some form of independent body that has the kind of representation that this commission has in terms of folks on the ground, folks in the legislature, folks at the agency and the tax department, monitoring and reporting on implementation of reforms as big as this one, providing guidance in specific areas that need to be worked through, is really important. In addition to playing that sort of nexus with the public, and the groundwork we've already laid to obtain public input into not just the governance changes, but the intersection of all three pieces of this reform effort. So.
Thanks, Nicole. Zoe.
I made a couple notes as people were talking, and I just want to start by reinforcing Elizabeth's comment. I think we should pause and really reflect on the fact that there's a lot of shared understanding of our current system among members of the commission. I think a desire for us to move to a place where we can more equitably serve our students, and recognizing that we need to make some fundamental changes to our system to do that. I think we're engaged in really thoughtful conversations here around what does that look like? What are some of these details that need to be worked through? And I'm hopeful that same level of engagement will continue in the Senate and the House, because I think there's been tremendous progress in understanding the current state of our system and the opportunity we have before us to really strengthen our public education system, starting from a place of agreement on some really fundamental aspects of our system. I think just the shift to a foundation formula, having buy-in there is really important. I think there's an understanding that shift will result in more equitable funding for our system, a more predictable rate for our taxpayers, and ultimately result in greater opportunities for our students. So I think that's a really important place to start, that we have that shared understanding. I think as we think about the problem statement, and this has come up in the conversation, we've certainly talked today about the impact on homeowners and the impact for property taxes. But I think something else that really came out to us in the listen and learn, particularly from students, was ensuring that they had access to the same educational opportunities. And that really needs to continue to be, I think, at the forefront of these conversations. We are facing, our districts now are facing incredibly difficult challenges ahead. I've already started to get a number of emails from superintendents and business managers around how will they approach the budgeting for next cycle. The reality is that our school boards and our superintendents are already contemplating more and more cuts for next year. And so this last session, there was a tremendous number of cuts and really painful decisions that our district had to make to get approval from the voters to pass the budgets. And so I just want to continue to emphasize that there's real and present challenges that districts are navigating in thinking about the budget for next session. And so the urgency for the timeline is to get this work started. I think we all acknowledge that this work will be multi-year and will take time and will need to involve an evaluation cycle to identify what's working as intended and what's not working as intended, so that there can be refinements to achieve these objectives. But I think when we think about just general principles of change management, right, there needs to be clear understanding of where we're headed, having those clear goalposts in place, and the leadership there to help to support that transition in creating the alignment and the support that's needed to strengthen opportunities for students. So I think it is important, as we think about that problem statement, to continue to talk about the impact to educational opportunities for students, and recognize that within our current structure, the options on the table are often only to cut. And that's having really negative impacts on educational opportunities for students. The other piece I would mention, just around funding itself, is making sure that the foundation formula means something. It is our responsibility as a state to ensure that the funding awarded by the state can deliver a high quality education for our students. And so as the proposal that's currently contemplated is kind of based on a methodology that accounts for the existing structure but doesn't contemplate scale. And so I think has been kind of positioned in the bill as a bridge to transition from our current state to our future state. I think it's important for us to really be thoughtful and clear around the inputs that are going to be needed in order to deliver on what that funding represents for students in very clear and concrete ways. Certainly as secretary, I have a real need to understand that and kind of leading this effort and helping to support our districts in implementing the funding in a way as intended to produce quality results for our students. I also just want to make a distinction too. I think oftentimes we're conflating district consolidation and school consolidation. They're different. So district consolidation is really designed around changes in governance that are supporting resource allocation. School consolidation is something that would require a further engagement from communities to make those decisions. And I'll just share personally, as we were developing this policy as a parent for the better part of the year, my kids were at a small rural elementary school of under 100 students. So this certainly was at the forefront of my mind around how you can continue to ensure high quality education in a rural context. And so I think what sometimes is missed in this conversation is that district consolidation can actually result in more resources going directly into those schools. And I think that hasn't been really part of the conversation. And then again, it's about educational quality. So if there are those choices that need to be made to provide students better choices, then that should be pursued, right? So I think the bill is contemplating that communities will still continue to be involved in that process, but I think it's important to make that distinction. And then in terms of the money flowing for the students, the agency has done some work in this area around creating some initial guidelines around how we could ensure that those dollars are following the student in ways as intended to make sure that those students that need more resources are benefiting from that. And so I think there's some great groundwork there that we can build on as we move forward. And then any conversation around governance, I think we need to apply the position that, the framework of form should follow function. So we really need to center all of these conversations in what resources we want students to benefit from, and then build from there in terms of thinking about those districts, structures, and also the role of the agency, the role of the state board. And I would also just mention around the agency's work, we've been really transparent over the last year in evaluating our processes and our organization and making some changes. And so looking forward to continuing that work along with the state board in the process that's already underway. And I think has made some tremendous gains in terms of making the necessary change to support the system. And then lastly, I would just conclude by going back to the conversation around the vision. I think it is important for us to have a unifying vision as we're engaging in this work. I know as part of the agency's strategic planning, we were beginning to do some of that vision development work, building on what we've heard in the Listen and Learn tour. And I think what's come out for us is it's clear that, in Vermont, we want to be the best education system in the country, but that has to be done in a way that's really specific to Vermont and builds upon our values and builds upon what makes us unique and special. And so we've begun using a framework around, in Vermont, we give our students both roots and wings, and roots being really ensuring that our students are connected to their community, to the values of environmental stewardship and community connection, developing their own sense of self and personal identity, and that we also want to give kids wings so that they can really fulfill their full potential and explore multiple different interests and paths. And I think often in this conversation, we've said kind of separated both of those concepts, and I think it's really important for us to to come together and talk about how intentionally we can design a system that's giving students both roots and wings in these conversations. And hopefully that can be it's been a helpful framework for the agency as we've been developing our strategic plan, and could be a helpful framework as we're thinking about navigating some of these challenges and complexities of delivering on the promise of our system for students.
Thanks, Zoe. Anyone else think of something after? Or
Just
I know I didn't. I
reflect,
skipped you.
that's good. Since I talked plenty already. I think part of the real value of the commission is that, and it's, something that we all have to work on at all times, is that we all come here from the narrow interests that we represent, yet try to come up with a statewide vision. You can imagine how much narrower the interests are of each individual legislator, and how hard it is to say, I know that this may not benefit me and the towns I represent personally, but I'm willing to sort of think broader than that. And so I think it's incumbent on all of us on the commission to, we aren't here just to represent principals, we're here to represent the state and more importantly, kids. And that message needs to be telegraphed to the legislature as well, saying your job is also to not narrowly represent just sort of one facet of Vermont society, but this is something that we need to be thinking about on a statewide level. And I would just say one more thing. We are all universally agreed on school construction. The funding part is very difficult. And I think one of the things that I have felt most bad about is the struggle that the field has with trying to plan for a future that has not yet been defined or funded.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks, everyone. I think that was helpful. I'm glad we have the captive audience. I feel like it will be debate. I did want to, as I'm taking notes, the one piece that every single person mentioned in one way or the other is the concept of timeline. And I am just wondering if there is a more sort of, have we surfaced a commission agreement in the area of timeline? All of the comments that we said, I understood that we're around getting it right, that this is monumental change that will take time and years to implement, and pushing and changes at the last minute that are not vetted is of concern to lots of folks. I hear you, Zoe. Your comment is around getting it started, which is a little bit different than, that's not to say it's different than getting it right. I know you also want to get it right. But I just I'm asking that question of the commission. Feel like the commission is making a statement about timeline, or are you feel like it's better to just give our individual perspectives to the?
There's two timelines. There's a timeline of legislative action, to do something or not to do something in this immediate moment. And then there's the actual timeline of what it is you do or what the legislature does and how that plays out. So I think what you're talking about is I think most of us were talking about first timeline, about the legislative action. I think is what we're talking about. I just want to make clear, we're not talking about whatever happens.
Yes.
There is a timeline component that's been discussed a lot.
Agreed. I'm speaking for myself. That's what I heard everyone speak to is rush at the end of the session to make a decision.
I just want to be crystal clear because they're somewhat related in a way, but
yeah. And as I say that out loud, though, I want to say, and I think it's actually both because everyone also said everything that's involved with redistricting and deciding, like, you're a teacher, that's who's your new boss. Where's your paycheck coming from? All those things are big and take time. I see Emily and then Nicole.
I would venture to guess that we won't all reach consensus on the timeline in terms of the implementation of the full transformation, but I think we can agree that it's multi-year. And I think what I'm hearing is really a desire to have a greater sense of that project plan. So what are the key inputs and milestones that need to be achieved over this multi-year rollout? I think that is really critical, and that's what I'm hearing coming from this discussion. And then I think there's the separate conversation around the actual timeline of getting the legislation passed. And I think what I have heard is, good that we're taking a little bit more time. But I do think it's important that we get something meaningful across this session, and that is delineating also areas where there may need to be further review.
Thanks, Zoe. Nicole?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's two different timelines. It's the timeline of passing a major policy, and then there's the timeline of implementing it, right? So my takeaway from the conversation today was it's the timeline around establishing a policy that has people most concerned. And, I know there was some disagreement between the governor and the House and Senate bill in terms of the timeline of implementation. I wonder whether implementation could be sped up if the policy decisions are thought through a little bit more carefully. And it seems to me that given the universal almost recognition that the governance piece and the funding piece need to go hand in hand, I don't know why we would take more time on the governance piece and not allow that same amount of time to happen with the foundation formula, which then you have a structure that's been recommended, potentially approved, and you can lay the funding formula on top of that in a way that helps people really understand what it is we're doing.
Thanks, Nicole. Okay.
I thought that there was a little bit of a consensus between most senators and most members of the House that the governance and the redistricting and financial piece all had to come together. So I think that's true. So I think that's a positive step. And I also think that we need to be willing, no matter what passes out of this legislative session, it might be a year from now or a year and a half now, and say, hold on, we need to put on some brakes. We just learned something new. And I've heard Rep. Kornheiser say something along those lines a couple different times. So I think we need to be mindful that that's also a possibility too.
But I would agree, and it's also probably a reality. Taking away foundation formula, edge quality, and all that, just the government operations part of this, the voting of new district boards and how that all happens is far more complicated than it sounds. And, I think the legislature and probably all of the administrative functions around it within the administration, are going to always have to reevaluating things getting into place, just as we did with Act 173, which we ended up having to sort of delay here or there, and COVID, of course, hit. We don't know what's going to happen with the federal government, but sort of adjusting as we go is always available.
And we look at Act 46.
Sort of said
This is like Act 46 on steroids. Act 46 is like this little tiny blip that we did compared to what's being contemplated here. Completely be redrawn districts across the whole state. Good time to be a consultant.
Well, so I guess I would say, I don't think it's useful for us to spend some time, wordsmithing or like voting on this consensus even around timeline. I think there was enough of a theme that if Nicole or I, as chair and vice chair, are asked for the, summary, could at least surface the issue of timeline and being thoughtful as an issue. I don't know that we need to get more concrete than that. I think we've given Peter quite a bit of information. I do have a question this would be the time in our meetings where we transition to committees. And we had a thought, Nicole and I, around how to make that committee conversation useful. I'm probably putting too much pressure on you, Peter, but I would be interested in hearing your perspective on this. We thought our committee meetings, for those who are new to joining this conversation, have been working through a series of a framework for looking at policy change that's derived from essentially an equity assessment tool. It is a tool that says anytime someone is developing public policy and doing so from an equity standpoint, they would look at these considerations. So in order to be useful during this process, we have been working our way through that framework. We're about 2/3 of the way through. That's what we spend our committee time on. And for purposes of the speed and being useful, we thought that in today's session, each subcommittee could actually take the blank framework. It's about 6 questions and type in, some of you have already done this, but really create a single document. Reiterate your conversations about questions 1 through 3, keep going, so that we could consolidate that and produce, for purposes of the conference committee, whoever, here's the perspective of the commission on policy implications. At the time, that felt like it might be a useful use of our time. I also don't want to engage in an exercise, frankly, that isn't useful. And I guess my question is it worthwhile for us to go into subcommittees and do that? And if we do and we produce something, if it's just sort of gonna sit on a desk, then I'm not sure it's the best use of our time.
From a practical standpoint, just, other than this conference committee and then the bodies acting as a whole, that in between area that what we report to and discuss with doesn't really exist in terms of committees and all
That's
that.
right.
So there's, there's really at this point, no group that is specifically in this discussion to report to. I don't really have if I have a good answer. That's been part of my problem on the conference committee is I sort of need time to contemplate and think and don't have a good answer. I don't think any of our discussion time is ever poorly spent. I think it's always valuable. And I would just say the discussion we just had for the last 2 hours has been very valuable and very good, I think, for us as a group. So I don't know.
Okay. No, I put you on the spot. So commission members, the question is really, we can break into subcommittees as we would have done. And if we do that, I would encourage us to create a running summary of our discussion. But that's the question. That's the question that I would love anyone to weigh in on. Nicole?
Yeah, I'm just wondering whether we have devoted sufficient time to the role of the commission moving forward. I know folks sort of touched upon that, but if irrespective of who we might report out to, if there's a place to report out some themes of today's discussion, and one of them was what we just talked about in terms of timeline, do we have consensus around future role of the commission? Would that be a useful, I think the questions that we're looking at as committees are the right questions. And if no one knows what the answers are at this moment in time, but it would be useful to talk about what we think our role would be post enactment of something. I just want to make sure we don't miss that opportunity.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I would connect those 2 conversations, because if we were to extend our discussion on what our future role would be, I suspect we might say our future role would be to complete that work on the implications of whatever is passed. Because right now what we're doing is we're analyzing something that's somewhat material, because it doesn't exist yet. So what we would do then is not break into subcommittees. I would suggest we will take a break either way. That we'll take a short break and then just continue our discussion specifically about what is this commission's recommendation on its role, because that is actual language proposed in whatever version, Jay.
Can we get just a brief update on how the active groups reaching out has gone? A lot of us have times we plan on meeting them, and meeting the legislature.
Or
Time.
agreed to be in it, like, I think it was last Wednesday or through the time change. Like, it was supposed to be from 2 to 3:30, and then I had to log on at 2, and it had actually been from 9 to 10:30. Like, they changed the time.
Oh, I didn't.
That's not. Yes, I know. Didn't go.
So I think, so I don't
Okay,
have a
it's done.
summary. I don't have a summary. I meet with them tomorrow.
Okay.
They finished this last, there is one more session scheduled. I think that's also worthwhile to talk about. On June 11th. Because that fell after the point at which we thought something might have happened. We said we'd discuss it. Now it's not falling after that point because June 16th is when we would go. By the way, we also may want to talk about June 16th since that is our next meeting.
Do you want to be here or there?
Exactly.
I know where he wanted to be.
So I think I'm gonna suggest, let's just keep with this discussion as a group. We won't break into committees. It's 3 o'clock though, and those of us in the room haven't moved. So why don't we take a 10-minute break and then we'll reconvene at 3:10 and continue our conversation. That works?
Are we gonna do public to be heard
And then,
first come back, or?
no, we'll do it.
Have it for 3:05.
For the committees though.
That's for committee. Yeah, for the full meeting, we'll do it at the very end of our meeting, but yeah. Thanks. All right, welcome back, everyone. So let's aim for about a half-hour continuation of the discussion so we can leave time at the end for public comment. And I'll just keep track of the time so that before we switch over, we also just figure out our next two. Whether or not the June 11th public session active should continue, and then our next meeting, and whether or not we keep that for the 16th. So I think we are trying to circle around making a recommendation to, however you define making a recommendation. What is the commission's perspective on what our role and revised charge should be in this, in whatever comes out of this?
I might just speak first, if you don't mind.
Yep.
Just to say that there was language on the table that I will read, and it echoes what I said previously. So in addition to the other changes, so I proposed some language that said the commission shall study and make recommendations regarding how larger consolidated school districts shall operate, including how school boards and larger consolidated school districts can operate efficiently, effectively, and still maintain connections to local communities throughout each district. That sort of goes to the vision part of our task and sort of this is based on an assumption that we look different than we look today. But really, how do we, sort of maintain that? Well, not only how should a board be and look and operate, but also how to maintain those connections. Anyway, that is actual language that was on the table.
Thoughts, reactions? I think we should just be free flowing as opposed to going around. Clarifying question. In that version, am I a version behind if I'm thinking that's in addition to the role of the state board and the agency? In other words, is that sort of there's the revised charge, everything else is.
So there's been a number of versions. So yes.
I'm behind.
So yes, this is in addition to.
Okay.
And there was other language as well that was proposed in addition to, which is to sort of provide guidance as to a process or how a board talks and works with the community when a school may be decided to be closed.
And that is part of the,
That is part of new language.
which almost doesn't matter. I think our goal here is just to discuss all of it,
Yes,
really. Everything.
but those two are literally on paper.
Okay. Nicole?
I think I'm understanding that this is it's an additive conversation in terms of new duties to the commission, not necessarily eliminating existing. Did I understand?
Yeah,
It's hard.
It is additive to what is proposed to be a slimmed down charge for the commission. I know that's a little confusing, but yeah.
Yeah, and
I mean, I don't, because I haven't seen the most up-to-date language, or I'm not sure I know what I'm looking at, but I think we have suffered from a couple things. One is a very broad and ambitious charge with that in some ways is duplicative of the role of the state board and or the agency. And we have no staff to do it ourselves. So it just feels like it's adding work or replicating work. So I just think about like assembling this group of people around the table. What value does that add to the conversation as a state? And I think having a charge as broad as what is the vision for public education is not, we've not been able to respond to that. Maybe that's because we've been distracted by legislation moving through the body that would have a substantive impact on what the vision is. Anyway, I think a narrower charge, realistic timelines, if in fact it's, like last summer, give us some ideas for short-term cost containment. But the deadlines for doing that were pretty tight. And again, in the absence of staff, we had no joint fiscal office support. It was, again, the agency needing to provide us with information. We were not well positioned to provide, recommendations. So I said this earlier, I do think if there are specific questions related to governance, that the legislature would like the input of these hats that are being worn around this table. This is a group that's been meeting for over a year now. We're well established and familiar with each other. I think when we have a clear purpose and we function at a pretty high level. So take advantage of that, but don't duplicate work that's happening elsewhere. And I do think if we're embarking on a reform of this magnitude, and there's some concern about the politicization of it, that a group like this could add value in terms of seeking public input, reporting out on progress as it's unfolding, so that if we want to recommend some changes in terms of tweaks in the future, we're positioned to do that.
Nicole, Jennifer?
Yeah, just to kind of add on to what Nicole just said, I think what would be really important is if the commission is given discrete questions or things to come back to the legislature on. It would be really helpful if we were given the lane and allowed to stay there, because I think what happened, just reflecting on the last 12 months of mission, is that we were given a charge, and then that charge, again, I don't mean this as a criticism, but that charge was kind of usurped in a way that then made it kind of confusing for the commission, that is now we're kind of stepping on toes and we continue our regular work. So I think if the legislature were to say, hey, we want the commission to, look into government structures and whatever, it would be great to then give us the time to do that and then come back to the General Assembly with whatever our proposal is in a way that's not competing in live time with what other entities might be doing. And then the other thing that I would say is,
as we are considering shifting to the foundation formula and the idea that this is going to take years to roll out, I could actually see a continued role for the commission to play, like over the next few years, as things are implemented, there are hiccups, there need to be tweaks. You know, I could see us being a really good organization that really floats between the General Assembly and the public, and we would be able to report back to the legislature, and that we could be using.
Yeah, thanks. Both of those things make sense to me. I was thinking, Nicole, as you were even asking the question about the current status of our charge. And I was sort of pictured as, let's just assume the entire thing has been struck, because a good portion of it is struck in whatever we consider to be the current. And then let's have a conversation about what to add back. And so the things that we've talked about adding back are this concept of being a body that is somewhere in between the politics and the field for implementation. So implementation support, so that I'm not repeating. So I've heard that being added back as a useful. And the other thing that I have heard, not necessarily in today's meeting, but in most of our other meeting, is that we, at least at the moment, are poised to be able to be the engagement body that does more public engagement. And again, which we have done, this is sort of our pattern, but we've changed our structure for communication to respond to this, which means we really haven't gotten fully out and physically out with all the groups that we want to, but we are poised to be able to do that. So the other thing that I have heard in addition to implementation support is engagement, but it wouldn't be engagement on what should we do. It would be engagement on, now that there has been a decision about X, what are the, right? It would be a different layer of engagement. What else would be a value for this role? Maybe it's just those two things. I don't know.
I guess I would offer that this group is a pretty cheap date. And that.
We do like it when the tech centers speak,
Yeah.
but other than that, yes.
And, you know, I'm certainly, I'm very struck by the comment of like, just give us a lane and let us stay there, is important to hear as well. This is great feedback, actually, very helpful.
Just a thought, maybe about it, so feel free to shut me down. But I think also, in addition to being in the interplace between the General Assembly and the field, we also could be in partnership with the AOE, between the AOE and the General Assembly and the field, to help the agency. This is what the field's saying. Here's how we think this could actually, working with them, as because the work that the agency of education is going to have, regardless of where we end up, is going to be immense. And so being an organization or on a mission, it can help support the AOE, the actual functioning of the implementation of wherever we end up. I think we'll have lots of value as well. Or could.
Yeah, I probably, even by naming those two things, was narrowing but the concept is it's a pretty diverse group of people. It's probably a bridge between multiple things.
Well, that's what I was thinking about too, because we represent different facets of the whole system and how they interplay together, and we have different kind of unique perspectives. But we can have a conversation and bring those components. You know, I have principals, teachers, we have support with the state board. So there's interplay. I think we can kind of role play and problem solve some of those issues, because we you know, I also take heed to the statement of staying in our lane. We're not proposing anything for any of those individual groups or agencies. It's how the whole system works together and functions as one. That's important.
I'm wondering, are there other organizations that might be a good addition to the commission? For instance, someone who represents CTE And I know like you guys all sort of tangentially represent that, but I'm just wondering as we're thinking about how all of these pieces fit together as we are talking about a global statewide change to our education system, would it be helpful to have other bodies here?
That also makes me think, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that we have both acknowledged and have heard criticism about is that we have, while we are representative in sort of the traditional way Vermont education thinks of as representative, right? We have the superintendents, we have the teachers, we are not representative of the state as a whole in terms of, so I think if what the recommendation is that a body needs to exist, and here are, we also need to think more deeply around, we don't have students on this group, and that's been said, we don't necessarily racially and ethnically and socioeconomically represent the full state. And that does not mean we need a 35-member commission. It means we have to just think really carefully. So I think I'm just agreeing with you.
Yes.
So that especially if this body is going to preserve through a multi-year process, because that's the other thing too, is it's this 13 people expecting to be finished in a year. By the way, I'm familiar with commissions that go longer than they are charged. So if we are defining a body for multiple years, we should take the opportunity to think who's missing.
The concept of the commission, going beyond its current lifespan will be one of great challenge. I'm not sure we're necessarily beloved by the other body and the administration, but it also, as everybody keeps saying, could have a different function, a different mission.
Well, isn't that part of our role, the public engagement portion of our task? So I agree, I don't think it's advisable for any board to be 35 members or something like that, any commission. It's too unwieldy, I think, but we do have this public engagement component. And so here from Acton at our next meeting might be good and hear where they are, what they heard, and getting assessment or some summary or something.
Totally agree. And what I would offer to paraphrase that question, and it's also just helpful to say it every time. And honestly, this is because of some of the, I think, feedback we got about engagement. We were on a path when Acton responded to an RFP way back last fall. We were on a path that had a due date of December 31st. So what they designed for us was a framework. Here's what good equitable engagement looks like. Here are all the components of it. Here are all the groups. And part of that framework, frankly, was training us as commission members to go out and then do more. And you all will remember, like February-ish, seeing the draft framework, and we had a couple conversations, and then we pivoted, like we pivoted a lot of times to say, they're moving fast. We don't have time. And so we pivoted to, okay, let's get them to help us plan our next couple of in-person sessions. And then even that wasn't fast enough. So then we said, let's flip this, let's do 5 virtual sessions. And the only reason I say that is maybe it's a little bit to like sort of defend what we're trying to do. But also, if I wouldn't want people to think that allowing, because I hear the criticism from the other body or the desire to not really pay attention to the commission. And if that is related to, well, they're not doing a great job with that anyway, that's why I offer that as explanation. And if one of the things, if this group preserves and if one of our charges is engagement, we will be leaning into the much more robust process that we were intending to do. And that I think Afton is still poised to do. It's just that our timeline has been changed and we need to be realistic too, I think. At some point, we have to cut bait if they're being one of the people who's listening in on all your conversations. It's very clear which body desires for the commission to continue and which doesn't. And so I think we have to be realistic about that. Zoe,
I don't.
oh, sorry,
I'm sorry, I'm sorry, go ahead, so I was before me.
sorry. Go ahead, Zoe and Jay.
I was just going to reinforce the importance of ensuring that there's a clear scope to the charge of the commission. I also want to call out a level of prioritization and timing is really critical. For full transparency, the administration did provide a side-by-side, and so I want to just relay what was communicated regarding the scope of the commission. So we did not support reviewing state-level oversight and governance of the education system, while both the AOE and the state board are engaged in review, evaluation, and potential structural changes. Doing so would be disruptive to the processes that are already underway. State level governance must be informed by decisions regarding school districts and the State Board of Education and AOE's review of existing rules, which is funded through the bill, along with additional studies that are required by the agency. So I just call that out because I think what we're talking about is pivoting is that there are certain inputs that are often necessary in order for the commission to evaluate. And so I think this goes back to a timing issue as we think about some of the work underway. So for full transparency, I just wanted to name that. And that's also posted on the conference committee website so that you have clarity around the side by side and what the administration recommended. But I think just personally for me being a member of the commission, I think it is really important to have that scope. And as we think about the public engagement sessions, being really clear on what we're trying to gather and clear on how that information will be used to inform the next steps.
Thanks, Zoe. Jay?
I was just gonna say, I don't want the commission to be a exercise in just having meetings. I've got plenty to do. I don't know about everybody else, but I only want to do this work and it's gonna be meaningful and help to bring about systemic change in a way that's good for all. If it is, I'm all in. If it's not, then I'd much rather do something else.
Well, back to your point of public engagement, we were going to have a plan that we were
Yes.
engaging with, which we don't have. But what I will say from talking to a lot of community members over the last couple of weeks, as they've heard more about the legislation and the legislative process, what we've seen is how it works. It's how it's designed to work. There's back and forth, there's discussion, there's proposals. Sometimes those proposals change every day. But as your average citizen, parent in the school district who doesn't engage in that process, it's not their everyday world. All of a sudden, there's news reported. They're hearing about the changes, and they get very concerned. And they usually reach out to their own school, and one of the conversations of is there will be something that comes out. So I would just also say to our face of the legislature, Representative Conlon, that I think that's important to remember that we've been talking about massive changes to the system that most of our community, not just parents, but the community in general, have not really understood, because those of us who are at this table are invested in. And it's something that we live every day. And we have understanding of that process, even if some of it's not up to date, which we've illustrated. But our parents and our communities are not that same way. So I think once there's some kind of proposal that someone in this state needs to, whether it's the commissioner, whether it's some other mechanism, has to help start explaining that to in the process, the timeline to our citizens, because there's a lot of confusion and concern and angst right now because of that.
And it is true that, if and when we wrap up our work, our legislative work, this is the last remaining sort of public facing entity to explain or acknowledge or whatever the decisions that were just made
Yeah, I
or
would
gather feedback on.
agree, and I would also just use like the examples in recent history, none of which frankly played out particularly successfully, but Act 127, which had a huge impact. People didn't really understand what that was, and the groups that were ultimately responsible for explaining it was individual superintendents and school boards when they were pitching their budget. Here's why our budget is so different in whichever direction. Act 173 had lots of changes, but most people don't really. And those are things, those two are a slice of the education system. This actually does impact where a kid might go to school or which high school they might go to, or so. I guess I'm just reiterating that the body is important, and I think that I would be interested for those who don't believe, this isn't, I'm asking that I hope the legislators answer this. I don't want to answer here, but if there is a determination that the commission is not the body for that implementation work, I hope they are really concrete and specific about who that is then and what are the expectations, because it's so much bigger than I think anyone except a small slice of Vermont really understands. Thoughts? Our half hour went much faster than our. I feel like, well, you've mostly just given like a legal pad full of facts to Recon. And we do really appreciate your conveying it. Any other final thoughts by commission members before I asked us about this in particular? Okay, so and then we will have public comment, but our next scheduled full commission meeting, that is our virtual meeting on June 16th. That's the day that the legislature wants to change, but in theory, that's the day they come back. I happen to not be in town on the 16th.
I would not recommend we meet on the 16th.
Yes, that makes sense.
A pitch for meeting, or are we?
I mean, you could say the 23rd.
So that's a good question. The other thing is the steering group does have its regular meeting tomorrow. It didn't directly follow this, so maybe the steering group, I would say, let's give some input to the steering group, but it does sound like consensus is not to meet on the 16th. We certainly won't have our legislators, and we might not have any more information than we have now. So I think it's fair to say, sort of for the record, that the commission will not meet on June 16th. The steering group, I think, can decide whether or not we try to meet off cycle, or if we just default to our next scheduled meeting, which looks like July 7th. And by the way, we would have had a normal conversation about, are we meeting in the summer, or are we not? And I think the answer to that question is going to depend on what we're being asked to do. Okay. And
if we do meet, is there talk about meeting like originally at the agency?
Correct.
The summertime, does that make sense?
Yep, or do we have virtual meetings over the summer? I mean, I think these are all questions that I think the steering group should weigh in on. And even I will just acknowledge it'll be hard even for the steering group to weigh in on them, because they won't have any more information than we have. But typically heading into summer, a body like this would say, do we meet at all in the month of July? If so, what do we do? And that's going to depend on whether or not we have a December 1st deadline, no deadline, August, right? There is one more public input session that Afton has scheduled for June 11th. At first, we thought that might not be relevant. I feel like since we had all of the other ones and they are prepped to facilitate that one, we might as well just let that one go just the same. I'll get a sense from them tomorrow what attendance has been like and sort of what they're learning. I can push out an update to the commission in my, what's supposed to be a weekly update. I think I haven't been weekly.
My only thought is that no one has showed up to I think the last time that there was one meeting, instead of I've told them we should have been 3 by now in the interim.
Yes.
And I would be curious to know if they were well attended or not well attended.
I know they were more well attended than the first one. I know that confidently. I don't have exact numbers, but that's the kind of update.
Yeah, like as long as people are attending them, I think it makes sense to hold the last one, but if no one showed up, then.
Yeah. Okay, so I will update the commission on that. And actually, do I meet with them before? That's helpful. I actually meet with Afton before the steering group meets, so I'll have that information to be able to share with the steering group.
What time are we meeting steering group?
It looks like 3 o'clock. And it's virtual. That one's always virtual. With that, we have another opportunity for those of you who got to listen to that conversation. For public input, I'll monitor both the screen and in person. If there is anyone on the screen, you can go first this time. There wasn't anyone sooner. but I don't see hands at the moment.
Is there anyone in the room?
Yeah.
Good afternoon. I'm Colin Butler. I'm a resident of the town of Hartford. I'm a longtime Wisconsin school board member, and I was actually on the town of Sharon school board about 35 years ago. I don't have any prepared comments, so this is going to be a little bit of a ramble if you can bear with me. I think citizens of Vermont expected there to be some action taken on providing relief to property taxpayers in regards to funding education in the legislature this session. I don't think any citizen of Vermont anticipated that the governor and the secretary of education were going to turn the entire system on its head and propose a 5-district system of education in Vermont. It's just beyond my comprehension that that's where the legislature started this time, and where they've ended up is really unclear to me at this point. I appreciated the discussion here today. I particularly appreciated hearing the latest from the conference committee. But it's unclear to me that the legislature is actually going to accomplish anything before they adjourn summer. And it strikes me that I probably will be most happy if they go home without enacting any legislation to do public education. I think a board like this, a commission like this, types of representation that are here today, needs to take a very substantial, serious look at the state of public education in Vermont and make recommendations to the legislature and AOE and the governor to create the opportunity for improvements to the way we educate our kids. And I don't necessarily think that means spending less money going forward than we spend right now. I think the bigger issue is to figure out how to finance education and not to nickel and dime school districts that are pushed past the limits of being successful with the tax opportunities they have available to them right now. So I don't know if any of this would be a surprise to you, but I'd wrap up saying this is the first meeting of this group that I've attended. I haven't paid very much attention to what you've done. I was very pleased when the commission swarmed. I thought there was going to be some potential improvement to the way education is delivered in Vermont. And then everything went silent. So you've talked a couple of times during this meeting about public input or communication to the public. I think I'd give you a failing grade on that. And I don't know if that's your fault or the AOE's fault or whoever should be supporting you staff-wise to provide access to the public. But you really need to do a better job of communicating to the public what you're up to. I think it's good work that you've been doing, but it needs to be communicated to the public. I think the vast majority of people living in Vermont have no idea what's going on right now and what the tremendous threat is to public education in Vermont that's posed by the legislation that's passing through H 54. You got to do a better job communicating. You really have to protect the work of the commission. It's vital. You need to get the legislature to back off a little bit and give this commission time to reach its natural end. And then you need to fight to push through whatever it is you come to regard as the determination of the group that this is where we want education to go in Vermont. I think it's important work that you're doing. I would support you 1,000,000%. But I hear very little about you. I think that's probably the first thing you got to figure out how to communicate with the public. I think most of the state public would be behind you if they knew what you were up to. Thanks. Thank you.
Don't see anyone on the screen.
I'm Laura Miranda Raymond from Norwich, former school board member, parent, and actually Vermont resident, grew up high school, college. Couple questions. I want to just echo your sentiments. I went to one of the active partner sessions. There were 3 of us there. I've been following World's work really closely for all the time, read my local newspaper, follow the search. I had to dig to find the information and I knew it was coming. So I would argue that if the interest in getting more public impact, there has to be a better communication strategy to let people know what's going on. Because even those of us who are following it closely are having a hard time. Like I reached out to you because I couldn't get information about today's meeting. I knew it was coming. I went to the website and I couldn't find any information about it. So I think there's a communication component that's missing. So I would hate to have anyone walk away from those after sessions and think that people not showing up means that people aren't interested. I think people don't know about it. So I think that there's an important distinction there. The other, is a technical question. Is class size minimums still on the table?
Yes.
Okay, so the technical question I have is, I heard Secretary Saunders say, this is about district consolidation, not school consolidation. And having been a school board member, there's no way we get to class size minimums. The last number I heard was 25, unless you're talking about school consolidation. So I think that there needs to be clarity. We can't say this is just about district consolidation if you're talking about class size minimums, because having served at Marion Cross, there's no way you get to 25 minimums at Marion. Now, Marion Cross is interstate, so it's way complicated, but there's no way you're getting to 25 unless you're consolidating schools. So the messaging is contradictory there, and it starts to feel like a little disingenuous that this is not about school consolidation. So the messaging needs to be clarified. Thanks.
I might just offer to clarify that the class size minimum conversation on both sides is far below 25.
Okay, and that's the last I heard was 25, which, thanks.
I also just wanted to, I see your hand, Zoe, in a second. I also just wanted, for the record, because this is actually a history that we have struggled with as well. All of our meetings, input sessions, it is true that the virtual ones were sort of crafted quickly. All of these press releases go out to media, including the Digger, including 7 days, including all of and we are very rarely, if ever, mentioned in those. And so I'm not exactly sure what the disconnect is. I don't disagree with you. And we're all of us have other jobs and are desperately trying to do that, but I'm not sure how to explain that either, but for the record, we have disseminated our, I think we have a lot of work to do around summarizing and informing, but in terms of like, here's who we are, here's when we're meeting, here's some info sessions, we really do push that out through the media, and it is remarkably silent around there. Zoe, I think you might have,
I just wanted to clarify my comment regarding the district consolidation. So when the governor first put forward his proposal, he understood that this process was a multi-year process and that the district consolidation is helpful in ensuring that there's more opportunity to share resources across schools than are currently allowable in order for our schools to meet those education quality standards. The class size minimums can be achieved through different operations in many schools, and that there's a recognition that the community would need to be involved also in further planning around school consolidation. So in all of the early modeling in the governor's proposal, it really assumed our existing portfolio and made funding adjustments based on size, recognizing that after district consolidation, there was more work that would need to be done in the transformation of really evaluating the best way to deliver education quality for all students. And that's where the concept of small by necessity also came forward, and contemplating those schools in rural areas, but also schools that may be close to each other, but due to some facility challenges, may not have the opportunity immediately to think about consolidation. So I just share that this was a really thoughtful approach to thinking around how the district governance can provide more resources to schools and allowing for a longer ramp to really evaluate any sort of additional changes that might be needed to, again, deliver on the educational opportunities for students, and accounted for kind of adjustments that would be needed in the first several years to account for the funding to be able to operate. So just wanted to clarify that as best I could.
So any other members of the public?
Thank you. I'm going to play cheerleader for a minute. I think I've mentioned before that this is the first such group I've been involved with, sometimes at the table, sometimes in the audience, over the course of a number of years. I don't care to think about it at this point in time. But I'm very impressed with this group, both the composition of it and the conversations that you've been having. And I'm reminded of when you're talking about where you go from here, I'm reminded of an old movie my dad was very fond of. I mean, old black and white World War II movie, some boat captain in the Navy. And the quote my dad liked so much was, "Darn the torpedoes, full speed ahead." Now I clean that up just a little bit. But full speed ahead and Godspeed also. You're doing a great job. I hope you can continue to do it because you're a good hope in my mind.
I also noticed the disconnect between the Secretary of Education's comment about district consolidation, school consolidation. This lady brought up, and the answer that we just heard is still a little unsettling to me. She's talking about district consolidation first. So if you go with the original proposal from the governor and the secretary, it was a 5-district system statewide. This district would stretch from Norwich to the Massachusetts border. So we're gonna consolidate districts. Maybe it's not 5, it's some greater number, but we're gonna consolidate districts. We've probably got 400 or 500 school board members in Vermont currently. If we went with 5 districts, we'd have 25 school board members. We'd have very few people that we knew on a district board. And that district board would meet, say in the case of this district, somewhere between maybe geographically centered between Norwich and Massachusetts, Springfield, Brattleboro, I don't know where that would be. But it would be a long haul to attend a school board meeting to face 5 people that we had no connection with at all. They might not live within 4 or 5 towns of where we live. And that's when the school consolidation decisions would be made by a small group of people that have no connection to our local communities at all. That's just one of the obnoxious features of the plan the secretary and the governor are proposing. Thanks.
Just to clarify, there was always a process built in to understand that there would need to be further rulemaking to define those parameters and to engage community. I think the focus needs to be on how we're engaging communities with our schools, and that's a really critical aspect of any of the work that we're doing.
One more, if there's anyone on the screen or otherwise. With that, I believe we are adjourned. Thank you very much. Thanks again for hosting us. And people who are here should take some to go. You all take